This is Walking D-Day, incognito in the Alps. Now we're in the Alps around Forcalquier for two good reasons. One is there was a lot of resistance activity in the area, and the other is I'm here for 2 weeks. The Alps was a propitious place for parachute drops because most of it was pretty inaccessible. Now, Réné Char joined the resistance soon after being demobilised in 1940. He had the name of Captain Alexander. He became the head of the SAP, or the parachute section. His headquarters was at Revest, to the west of Forcalquier. The first drops were near this Porchere tower, this isolated spot. They would mark the place with 3 lights in a row, and the aircraft would come in, dive down, drop the parachute bundles, and then disappear. Now they'd receive clothing, arms, and other supplies, and they'd hide them in different spots. The towers used to hide arms on the top floor. The drop zones were changed frequently to help avoid detection. Réné Char was a poet. He survived the war, and he became friends with Albert Camus and Pablo Picasso. On the 20th of May 1944, a German officer came to the Gendarmerie, which is behind me, and he asked Captain Riboulet for the list of the resistance. Now, the Captain Riboulet said, well, they should go and ask at the town hall. Now, at the town hall, Monsieur Bonnebiel, he told them they should ask at the sub-prefecture of the sub-county town. So they went to the sub-county town, and there Monsieur Bellion told them they should ask at the gendarmerie. So they're back at the gendarmerie, and they ask again for the list of resistance. And Captain Riboulet says tersely, we haven't got it. So the German officer goes away without being satisfied, and he says, you haven't heard the last of this, you'll be hearing from us within a week. Now 8 days later, a Dornier 127 flew over and dropped 8 bombs. One hit the gendarmerie, and there were 12 victims. And just near the gendarmerie was the old prison, which was called the Simonetti. It was abandoned as a prison in 1936, and then bought by the town from the state, then by an entrepreneur who wanted to make it a shoe factory. In 1939, with the outbreak of the war, it was taken over as an army barracks and then used as a prison for undesirables of the French state, German nationals and other foreigners. With the defeat of France, it was used for those seen as enemies of the Reich. The commissioner of the police came to inspect the prison, was shocked at the laxism of the guards. The prisoners watched over while they were working, but not other times, and sometimes not even when they were working. Prisoners were seen strolling around the town. Some Austrian prisoners were coaching the young football team in Forcalquier. Others joined the choral society and the orchestra. Now the building's still there. It was called the Simonet, and today it's been made into a sheltered home for autonomous handicapped. Of course, the prison had a big wall around it, and that's disappeared. An important aspect of resistance was printing tracts. The official press was giving out German propaganda, so getting information to people was important. At number 1, Avenue Marcel André, was a printing shop of Marius Testanière. He did legitimate printing, but also subversive tracts and many fake identity papers. The street is named after one of the resistance shot after an ambush at Oraison by the Germans. Where the infant school is now, the army had built a barracks to receive displaced people. When Alsace and Lorraine was invaded, the Germans considered that as Germany, and the men were good to be called up into the German army. Unless, of course, you didn't have a German name, then you had to move into France. The Spanish Civil War had just finished, and many people fled Spain. The area along the coast was also out of bounds, so many people had to move away. So all these people needed shelter. With the landings in Normandy starting on the 6th of June, the resistance got the idea that the war was nearly finished and that there was going to be a landing in the south of France. So Captain Alibert of the secret army, he decided he was going to take over Forcalquier. He had 12 volunteers with him in the cemetery. He asked them if they knew how to use a Sten gun. None of them had ever touched one. So he gave them a brief course in how to assemble and disassemble a Sten, and then they moved into town. Now the post office was open for them by the postmaster, and they took over the communications. Their lookout was sent up to the citadel, which is where I am, with a field telephone so they can contact other resistance groups. Known collaborators were arrested and put in prison in the armory. This went relatively peacefully, except the head of the Vichy militia, Faucon. He decided to resist and shot one of the resistance. He in turn was cut down by a blast of a Sten gun. Now they used tree trunks to block the road from Digne, and a steamroller was pushed into the road to block the viaduct bridge towards Manosque. Captain Alibert knew there were 3 trucks of reinforcements coming from Man, so he went out on his motorbike to lead them in. But as they just crossed over the bridge coming into the town square, he was met by a burst of machine gun fire, which luckily missed him. So he did a quick about turn and headed out of town. The trucks were some way behind him. They'd seen what was happening, and they turned and got out of town. And they headed to Saint-Meme. Alibert expected the men in the town to pull out, but somebody had told them that anybody leaving their post would be shot. And so they stayed, and they got cut down by the Germans. Now the Germans had got round the roadblocks and managed to get into town. Now when things calmed down, the mayor and the sub-prefect and the head of the Gendarmerie, Captain Philibert, they asked the Germans for permission to take the dead to the hospital. A similar attempt to take over Manosque had failed, and Louis Martin-Bret had managed to escape. Now, Louis Martin-Bret had been the head of the local resistance since 1943. He'd been captured by the Italians and escaped. Now, being on the Gestapo wanted list, he kept in the shadows and organised things clandestinely. The most tragic attacks on the resistance were the result of betrayal. Maurice Seignon had been trained in sabotage in Algeria, and he came to the Lower Alpes to train the Maquis in sabotage. Now, maintaining his identity as a resistant, he offered his services to the Gestapo, and he said he'd hand over the heads of the resistance to them for the sum of 2 million francs, old francs that is. That's about 3,000 euros today. Oraison was an important centre for the resistance. In La Brienne, just near it, there was a detachment of Italians installed. With Italy being out of the war, on the 13th of July, a small detachment of Germans moved into Oraison. The 16th of July, the regional council was having a meeting in Oraison. It was supposed to have been in Digne, but they got a message to say it should be in Oraison. Now, amongst those present were the regional head was Louis Martin-Bret. Others present were Marcel André, François Cousin, Maurice Favier, Émile Latil, and Jean Piquemal. Trucks carrying what looked like resistance moved into town, and they blocked the roads to Brienne. Now, the council of the resistance weren't sure what was happening, so they started moving out of town. Now, these apparent resistance in the trucks were actually the militia dressed up as resistance, and they started attacking the Germans. Apparently it was actually a feint attack, and so the councillors of the resistance started moving back into town to help this attack. And Émile Latil went to the town hall and he put back the bust of the Republic and he lacerated the portrait of Pétain. Now the militia revealed their real identity and arrested 11 of the resistance. Now they were taken to Marseille where they were interrogated. On the 18th of July they were shot at scene. Now one who did manage to escape was John Mathieu. He got to the river Durance and managed to cross it using a stave to stop himself being swept away. And he was heading westwards towards Villeneuve. And then two Germans turned up on bikes. They got off their bikes and it was too late for him to run away. So he thought, I'll just have to brazen it out. So he forced himself to be calm and he just strolled past them nonchalantly, and they never stopped him to search his bag, where they would have found a Sten gun. So he kept walking and he went some distance and he looked behind him to see what was happening. He couldn't see the Germans anymore, so he ran as fast as he could for as long as he could. Now, as he approached Villeneuve, he met the Maquis, and he took him to their headquarters and he explained what had happened to Oraison while they were eating. They wanted him to stay with them, but he said he was going to go on to Revest, north of Forcalquier. Now, this was late July. They'd often see Allied planes flying over to bomb bridges and factories. Now, the Maquis lived and slept under the stars, but sometimes, being near the village of Revest, they had the luxury of going to sleep in a bed. Now, on the 15th of August, American and French troops landed in the south of France in Operation Dragoon. The resistance now harassed the retreating German troops. The Americans arrived in Forcalquier, approaching from Digne, which is north. They'd already gone up to Digne and came back down to clear other towns. A Captain Maxime now organised a battalion to help the Allies. John Mathieu, being a mechanic, he was put in charge of collecting abandoned German vehicles and get them in working order. He would take around Captain Maxime on a BMW which could go up to 95 miles an hour.